The concept of months in our calendar, particularly January and February, often feels like a given, something we simply accept without question. But let's take a moment to dive deeper into the origins of our calendar and understand why these months, as we know them, didn't always exist, and why their existence can be traced back to a time when the Greek calendar reigned supreme. To begin with, the Greek calendar was quite different from what we use today. The ancient Greeks had a variety of calendars, each city-state often adopting its own system based on lunar cycles, agricultural seasons, or religious festivals. The most well-known among these was the Athenian calendar, which was a lunisolar calendar. This means it was based on the cycles of the moon, but also aligned with the solar year to ensure that the seasons remained consistent with the months. The Greeks divided their year into 12 months, but these months did not align with the months we know today. Now, let's focus on the months we are familiar with: January and February. These months, as we understand them, are a product of the Roman calendar, which was heavily influenced by the earlier Greek systems, but also adapted to fit the needs of a growing empire. The Roman calendar originally began in March, which makes sense when you think about it. March was the month of spring, a time of renewal and rebirth, a fitting beginning for the year. It was only later that January and February were added to the calendar, shifting the start of the year to January 1st. So, how did this shift occur? It was Julius Caesar who, in 46 BCE, reformed the Roman calendar, creating what we now call the Julian calendar. This was a significant overhaul, introducing the concept of a 365-day year with a leap year every 4 years to account for the extra quarter of a day it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun. However, January and February were still somewhat of an afterthought. They were added to the calendar to fill the gap left by the earlier system, but they were not tied to any particular agricultural or lunar significance, which made them feel somewhat arbitrary. This brings us to an interesting point: the very names of these months. January is named after Janus, the Roman god of beginnings and transitions, often depicted with two faces looking in opposite directions. This symbolism is quite fitting, as January represents both the end of the old year and the beginning of the new. February, on the other hand, is named after Februa, an early Roman festival of purification. While these names have significance, they lack the deep-rooted connection to natural cycles that characterized the months in the Greek calendar. In the Greek calendar, months were often named after gods, festivals, or specific agricultural activities. For example, in the Athenian calendar, the month of Hecatombaion was dedicated to the goddess Athena and marked the beginning of the year with the celebration of the Panathenaea, a festival honoring her. Each month was rich with cultural meaning, tied to the rhythms of nature and the lives of the people. In contrast, January and February, as we know them, lack this intrinsic connection to the natural world. Moreover, the Greek calendar was flexible. It adapted to the lunar cycles, which meant that months could vary in length. Some months had 29 days, while others had 30, and occasionally, an extra month would be added to keep the calendar in sync with the seasons. This fluidity allowed the Greeks to maintain a close relationship with the agricultural calendar, ensuring that they could plant and harvest at the right times. In stark contrast, the rigid structure of the Julian calendar, with its fixed month lengths, often led to discrepancies between the calendar year and the solar year, causing seasons to drift over time. As we moved into the Middle Ages, the Julian calendar faced criticism for its inaccuracies, leading to the eventual adoption of the Gregorian calendar in 1582, which corrected some of the earlier miscalculations. Still, the months of January and February remained, embedded within a system that had long since lost its connection to the cycles that once governed time. Today, when we think about the months of January and February, we might associate them with winter in the Northern Hemisphere. But this is a modern interpretation. In ancient Greece, the months would have been marked by different seasons and agricultural practices, each month carrying its own significance, rituals, and celebrations. The Greeks understood time as a living, breathing entity, intertwined with their environment, whereas our current calendar often feels like a mere construct, a way to organize our lives in a modern world that sometimes seems disconnected from nature. So, why is it important to understand this history? It reminds us that our perception of time is not universal. It has evolved, shaped by culture, religion, and the practical needs of society. January and February may be ingrained in our lives as the start of a new year, filled with resolutions and fresh beginnings. But they are also a reminder of how time is measured, understood, and celebrated differently across cultures and eras. In conclusion, while we may rely on the Gregorian calendar today, the absence of months like January and February in the Greek calendar illustrates a fascinating evolution of timekeeping. It showcases how our understanding of months has been influenced by historical figures like Julius Caesar, and how cultural practices shape our perception of time. So the next time you glance at your calendar and note the passing of January and February, take a moment to reflect on the rich tapestry of history that brought us to this point, and consider how our relationship with time continues to evolve.